I didn't find out my girlfriend was cheating because of lipstick on a collar, a text message popping up at the wrong time, or some dramatic midnight confession. I found out because she became a better person. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Her name is Emily. We'd been together for 5 years, living together for 2. We weren't engaged yet, but we were in that stage where everyone around us acted like it was already decided. We had combined furniture, shared subscriptions, a dog-eared notebook full of places we wanted to travel, and a standing argument over whether our next apartment should have more closet space or better natural light. We had, in every normal practical sense, a life. About 6 months before everything blew up, Emily announced she wanted to start volunteering on Saturdays. That wasn't out of character exactly, but it was new enough to stand out. She said she felt like she'd gotten too wrapped up in work and routine and wanted to do something meaningful with her time. She found a community outreach program that, according to her, partnered with shelters, food drives, and transitional housing programs around the city. Some weeks she said they packed hygiene kits. Other weeks they organized donated clothes or served lunches. Honestly, I admired it. I work in commercial insurance, which is a profession nobody dreams about as a child. Most of my weeks involve spreadsheets, tense emails, and listening to clients explain why they absolutely should be reimbursed for things they definitely should not. So when Emily started spending her weekends doing something selfless, I thought maybe she was evolving into a version of adulthood I was too cynical to reach. She'd leave around 8:30 in the morning wearing jeans, sneakers, and one of those plain volunteer event t-shirts she claimed they handed out. She'd come back around 3 or 4 in the afternoon tired, slightly flushed, and weirdly energized. She'd tell me small stories over dinner, an older woman who cried after receiving winter boots, a teenager who wanted help applying for jobs, a little kid who insisted on giving her half a granola bar because helpers need snacks too. Those stories were specific enough to feel real and sweet enough to make me feel vaguely guilty for spending my Saturdays watching sports and pretending I'd eventually organize the garage. My family loved it too. Especially my brother, Nate. Nate is 3 years older than me and has the kind of effortless charm that somehow gets more impressive the older he gets. In high school, teachers loved him because he looked them in the eye and laughed at their jokes. In college, girls loved him because he listened with his full face. Now he's 36, divorced, financially stable, and somehow still carries himself like a man who's always just walked out of good lighting. He and Emily got along well from the beginning. Not suspiciously well. Just smoothly. He was funny, she was quick, and they had the same kind of social reflex where conversations never seemed to hit dead air. At family dinners, they'd end up discussing books or documentaries while I got trapped helping my mother move chairs she'd already decided were in the wrong place. I noticed it, but in the way people notice rain in the distance. Not threatening, just there. When Emily started volunteering, Nate was one of the first people to praise her for it. He said things like, "That's actually really cool, and most people talk about wanting to give back and never do." Once, over dinner at my parents' house, he asked which organization she was working with, and she answered without hesitating. City Bridge Outreach. He nodded like he knew the name. I think one of my clients donated to them last year. That was the whole exchange. Completely forgettable. At least it should have been. The first odd thing happened in March. Emily asked me if I wanted to come with her one Saturday and help. She said they needed extra hands for a distribution event. I was actually excited. Not because I'm naturally generous, but because I thought it would be nice to see the part of her life she'd become so passionate about. Then Friday night she told me plans had changed. She said the event had been moved to a women's transitional housing site with privacy restrictions, so outside volunteers who weren't pre-cleared couldn't attend. She looked genuinely disappointed when she told me. She even said, "I really wanted you to see it." So I said no problem. At the time, that explanation felt reasonable. Looking back, it was the first time she offered me access and then quietly made sure I couldn't take it. The second odd thing happened a few weeks later when I did something deeply boring and accidentally useful. I offered to do laundry. Emily usually handled it because she was particular about separating colors and fabrics like they were rival nations. While I was sorting clothes, I found one of the volunteer t-shirts she wore on Saturdays. It was navy blue with white lettering that read City Bridge Community Health Fair. The thing is, I'm observant in bursts. Most of the time I'm the guy who can stare directly at an object for 10 minutes and still ask where it is. But once in a while, my brain locks onto details and won't let go. I remembered the shirt because City Bridge, according to Emily, did housing support and food distribution. Community health fair wasn't impossible, but it sounded broad in a way the rest of her stories hadn't. So I looked them up. No big reason. Just curiosity. Their website existed, but it was weirdly outdated. The events page hadn't been updated in nearly a year. Their Instagram was mostly fundraiser graphics and stock photos of canned goods. Nothing about regular Saturday volunteer programs. No sign-up links. No recurring weekend schedule. That still didn't prove anything. Small nonprofits can be disorganized, and websites often look like they were made by a nephew in 2017 and then abandoned to die. But it sat with me. A week later I asked casually, "Hey, if I wanted to donate to City Bridge, where would I do it?" Emily was loading the dishwasher. She didn't look up. "Oh, I can send you the link." "Cool," I said. "What branch do you usually work with?" That got half a pause. "Tiny, but there. They move us around a lot." "Right," I said. "Still mostly downtown." "Usually." That should have been enough to quiet me, but instead I noticed how carefully ordinary she sounded. After that, small things began piling up. She started taking a separate tote bag on Saturdays. Not the one she used for groceries or work, but a tan leather bag I'd bought her on our anniversary. It was too nice for sorting donation bins but perfect for an overnight stay or carrying makeup, shoes, and chargers. She also started coming home freshly showered. Not every week, but often enough that I asked once, "You guys have showers there now?" She laughed and said, "One of the sites has a staff gym. Sometimes we clean up after." Again. Plausible. Plausibility is what makes lying so effective. Not because it convinces you completely, but because it keeps you from feeling justified enough to push harder. The first moment I genuinely felt sick came from my mother, of all people. We were at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, and she asked where Emily was. I said she was meeting a friend for coffee. My mother nodded and then said, "She's so full of energy lately. I don't know how she does it. Between volunteering and helping your brother with all that charity auction stuff." I looked up. "Helping Nate with what?" She frowned. "Didn't you know? He mentioned she gave him ideas for some fundraising event his company was sponsoring." Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she had. Maybe Nate had mentioned Emily's volunteer work and my mother had built a bridge where there wasn't one. But then why didn't I know about it? That night I asked Emily if she'd been helping Nate with anything. She said, "Not really. He just asked a few questions about local nonprofits." There was nothing in her face when she said it. Nothing twitchy, nothing evasive. That almost made me feel guilty for asking. For 2 more weeks, I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came the hotel. I wasn't supposed to be there. My company had booked a conference room at the Belmere downtown for a client event on a Saturday morning. Last-minute policy revisions meant I had to stop by and deliver printed binders because apparently no email in corporate history has ever fully replaced paper stuffed into branded folders. I got there around 10:15, irritated, undercaffeinated, and wearing the expression of a man who resents both capitalism and valet parking. The Belmere lobby is the kind of place that smells expensive in a way no normal substance smells. Marble floors, oversized floral arrangements, staff who speak softly enough to make your own voice feel tacky. I was crossing toward the elevators when I saw someone familiar near the seating area by the bar. Emily. At first my brain misfiled it. Seeing a familiar person out of context does that. For half a second I actually felt pleased, like some coincidence had handed me an anecdote. Then I saw who she was with. Nate. They were sitting close, too close for siblings-in-law discussing fundraiser ideas. Her hand was on his wrist. He was leaning in. Not dramatically, just comfortably, with the kind of body language people only use when they no longer think of touch as a question. I stopped behind a column like an idiot in a bad movie. I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe he was helping with the charity. Maybe they'd met there for coffee before heading somewhere else. Maybe the intimacy I thought I saw was just the angle. Then he touched her face. Not a brush. Not a stray movement. His thumb went to her cheek in that absent affectionate way people get after repetition. And she smiled at him in a way I had never once seen her smile at a volunteer coordinator. I don't remember deciding to take my phone out. I just did. I got 2 photos. In one, they're leaning toward each other over a small round table. In the second, he's standing, her hand is at his waist, and they're both looking toward the elevators. Then they kissed. Quickly. Casually. Efficiently. Like people trying not to draw attention, which only made it worse. They walked toward the elevators together. I stood there with a stack of binders under my arm feeling like every sound in the lobby had moved several feet away from me. The front desk clerk asked if I needed help and I almost laughed because the answer was probably yes, in every possible sense. I did not confront them there. Partly because I was in shock. Mostly because I knew if I did it would become whatever version of the truth they could improvise in public. And I had just seen enough to know improvisation was one of their shared talents. So I delivered my binders, left the hotel, sat in my car for 20 minutes, and stared at the steering wheel like it had betrayed me personally. The drive home is blurry. What I remember clearly is the rage arriving late, after the numbness. Not just because Emily was cheating, but because of who it was. My brother. The man who had toasted us at my birthday 2 months earlier and called Emily basically already family. The man who hugged me every holiday. The man I had helped move after his divorce. The man who once cried in my kitchen because he said being betrayed by a spouse made him feel stupid. Apparently he found a way to recycle the experience. When Emily got home that afternoon around 4:30, she was carrying a canvas tote and wearing the same Navy volunteer shirt. She kissed my cheek and said, "Long day." I looked at that shirt and understood, maybe for the first time, how costumes work in real life. Not disguises. Signals. Props. I asked, "How was Citybridge?" "Busy," she said. We helped with supply sorting and intake forms. Downtown. She set her keys on the counter. Yeah. Why? I just nodded. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did something I should have done much earlier. I checked our shared credit card statements. Emily and I kept some finances separate, but we had one card for groceries, household things, and random joint expenses. She rarely used it alone, so the unusual charges stood out. Over the past 4 months there were recurring small hotel bar charges downtown on Saturdays. Not room charges, just bar tabs and parking validations. The Belmere was one of them. Another was at a boutique hotel 3 miles away. My hands actually went cold. I checked Nate's social media out of morbid instinct. Nothing obvious. Golf pictures, client dinners, one sunset captioned with something fake deep about gratitude. But on 2 of the Saturdays where those charges appeared, He had posted generic working weekend stories from his office building. His office building was not downtown. The next day I asked him to grab a beer. He agreed immediately. That almost made me hate him more. We met at a sports bar near his condo. He showed up in a quarter-zip sweater and that relaxed big brother smile I had spent most of my life trusting. For 10 minutes we talked about absolutely nothing. A bad trade rumor. My dad's blood pressure. A client of his who thought urgent was a personality trait. Then I put my phone on the table and opened the Belmere photo. He looked at it. And in that 1 second, before the denial, before the excuse, before the damage control, I saw the truth fully land in his face. He leaned back and rubbed his mouth. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer. I said, "You don't get to decide whether I know. You only get to decide how insulting you want to be." He stared at the table for a few seconds, then said, "It wasn't supposed to happen." There are few sentences more universally pathetic than that one. "How long?" I repeated. "About 5 months." 5 months. Almost exactly the same amount of time she'd been volunteering. I laughed once. I couldn't help it. It came out sharp and ugly enough that a couple at the next table glanced over. "With my brother," I said. "That was the plan you both landed on." He looked miserable, but not in a way that helped me. Miserable like a man suffering consequences, not conscience. He said they'd started texting after that family dinner when she mentioned Citybridge. He asked for non-profit recommendations for a corporate donation project. They met for coffee. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became something neither of us intended. According to him, Emily was unhappy, felt stuck, felt like our relationship had become predictable. I cut him off. "So you fixed that by sleeping with your brother's girlfriend in hotels on Saturdays while I thought she was helping homeless families." He winced like the wording hurt more than the act. I asked if anyone else knew. He said no. I believe that's the one honest thing he said. I didn't tell him what I planned to do. I just left. When I got home, Emily was on the couch with her laptop, looking up flights for a wedding we were supposed to attend in July. Normal life laid out on a glowing screen. I said, "How long have you been sleeping with Nate?" No build-up. No warning. She froze. I have never seen a human face go through that many calculations that fast. Confusion, denial, fear, assessment, all in less than a second. "I don't know what, don't." I held up the Belmere photo. "Please don't make this uglier than it already is." She stared at it and just deflated. That was almost worse than if she'd argued. She started crying immediately, and I wish I could say that moved me, but by then I was too far gone emotionally. I felt scraped hollow. She said she was going to tell me. She said she didn't know how to stop once it started. She said she never meant for it to become serious. I asked, "Is it serious?" And she took too long to answer. That was answer enough. The confrontation lasted maybe an hour, though it felt both longer and shorter. She admitted the volunteer story had been fake from almost the beginning. There had been one real event early on, and she used that as cover because it was clean and discouraged questions. Most Saturdays they met at hotels because it felt less risky than either of their homes. Sometimes they just talked. Sometimes they slept together. Sometimes they planned how to eventually tell me. That last part almost made me throw something. Eventually tell me. As if honesty was some future luxury they were magnanimously preparing to offer once the timing became more convenient for them. I told her to pack a bag and leave. She asked if we could work through it. She asked if I really wanted to end 5 years over the worst mistake of her life. I said, "You didn't make one mistake. You built a schedule." That shut her up. She left for her friend Lauren's place around midnight. Then came the family explosion. I told my parents the next morning because I refused to let either of them control the story. My mother cried. My father got so quiet it was frightening. He asked one question, "Are you sure?" and I sent him the photo. 5 minutes later he called me back with a voice I had heard only once before, at my grandfather's funeral, and said Nate had admitted everything. Nate tried to contact me 6 times that day. I ignored all of it. My mother wanted us all to sit down and understand how this happened, which is a sentence only mothers can produce in the immediate aftermath of moral arson. My father shut that down fast. He said understanding was for later, if ever. Right now there were only facts. For the next 2 weeks, those facts kept arriving. Emily had told Lauren a sanitized version where she and I were struggling before she got involved with someone else. Lauren, to her credit, contacted me and asked if that was true. I told her the full story. She stopped housing Emily by the end of that weekend. My parents uninvited Nate from Easter. Then they told him not to come by the house at all for a while. A few of our mutual friends found out, and I learned something deeply annoying. When betrayal is messy enough, some people become anthropologists instead of allies. They want the emotional documentary version. They ask how long, why, whether there were signs, whether I think Emily ever really loved me. As if pain becomes more manageable when converted into interview material. For a while I blamed myself in all the stupid predictable ways. Maybe I had become too routine. Maybe I had stopped being interesting. Maybe comfort had made me lazy with affection. Then, one night, I went back through my phone and found a picture from 5 months earlier. Emily, me, and Nate at my parents' barbecue. Emily's hand in mine. Nate's arm around my shoulders. Everybody smiling like trust was a permanent feature of the landscape. And I realized something that should have been obvious. Nothing I did caused 2 adults to lie strategically for months. You can contribute to relationship unhappiness. You can fail, neglect, drift, withdraw. Those are real things. But they are not the same thing as choosing deceit, and I got tired of carrying weight that belonged entirely to the people who put it there. Emily still sends messages occasionally. Mostly apologies. Sometimes memories. Once, very briefly, anger that I had turned my family against Nate, which is so wildly backwards it almost deserves academic study. As for Nate, the last thing he sent me was a 3-paragraph text about shame, self-destruction, and hoping one day I'd remember he was still my brother. Maybe he is. But he is not the same brother. And I am not the same man who used to think family automatically meant safety. The weirdest part is that now, whenever someone talks about volunteering, I feel this tiny involuntary flinch. Not because I think charity is suspicious, but because my brain still remembers the elegance of the lie. How she chose something morally flattering, socially protected, and difficult to question without sounding petty. She didn't just hide the affair. She wrapped it in virtue. I think that's what stays with me most. Not the hotel lobby. Not the kiss. Not even my brother's face when he realized I knew. It's the Saturdays. The calm certainty I had every week while she was supposedly out doing good in the world. The trust. The pride, even. The way I defended her schedule to people, admired her for it, built part of my image of her around it. That's the thing about betrayal when it's done well. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment you discover it. It reaches backward. It poisons the memories that used to make you feel lucky.